distribution of power. Distribution of power is about material, who has more or less economic and military power, but doesn't tell you about leadership, doesn't talk about uh, ideas and norms. I mean, good example today is the United States under second Trump. United States by far is still the most powerful state in the world. And you can say there is a little bit of asymmetric bipolarity between the US and China. China is looking at the door. So it's not strictly unipolar with US hegemony. But can you relate that to leadership? The United States doesn't want to lead. So that's the problem of using polarity, because polarity is only mostly about power distribution. But what about leaders? The aspiration and ability to lead doesn't coincide with who has most power. When the most powerful state doesn't want to lead or tries to undermine others' leadership. So that's why the world is also not multipolar. If you talk about world order, not the world in a generic sense, the world order, the distribution of power is multipolar, yes, asymmetrical. But the world order is a broader term than distribution of power. It's about leadership, it's about ideas, it's about interactions, and it's also not about the great powers only, it's also about middle powers, it's about regional powers, it's about non-state actors, corporations. So that's the multiplex world, the world of complexity. It's not simple anymore that you can, if it ever was, that you can look at who is the big power, how many big powers are there, and you can say it's unipolar, bipolar, multipolar. The world is not shaped by that, it's much more complex. And there are many ways of looking at this complexity. I'll come to that. A multiplex, on the other hand, looks much more messy. So it has, of course, the regional important. Transnational actors are also important in the middle, mediating between. So I represent, therefore, the future of world order as a multiplex, not liberal hegemony, not multipolar, not but multiplex. This is the broadest definition of world order. There's a lot more to this. There is an article in my book, as well as an article I did in Pacific Affairs with a couple of colleagues. You can read a lot more about multiplex, how it differs from unipolar, bipolar, or multipolar. There's an article called Multipolar or Multiplex, which is a very clear articulation of the difference between this kind of world orders. But more important, some features of the multiplex world. This is going up. Uh, maybe we have to do this. Hmm. So just a elaboration very briefly, unipolarity when there is a single power determines basic features of security order like Monroe Doctrine, liberal hegemony, Chinese tributary system, multipolarity, and bipolarity. I must them because a system in which power is distributed at least among two in the case of bipolarity, significant poles concentrating wealth and military capabilities, and in which each of these poles is capable of producing order or generating disorder on a global scale. Multiplexity is a world without a hegemon, culturally and politically diverse, but economically and functionally interdependent, where the ability of producing order or generating disorder to influence global outcomes lies not just with great powers, but with non-state actors, institutions, corporations, extremists, and social movements with material and ideal capacity. So it's a much broadening. It's like global IR broadens traditional IR. It doesn't really, I'm not saying there is no multipolarity, okay? But it's very narrow, old-fashioned way, a very kind of lazy way of saying, oh, there are five powers, multipolar, two powers, bipolar, one, without thinking of how complex the world is. And so there's much more to this than I'm saying here, but these are the characteristics of the multiplex world. At least five of the one I've selected. We sometimes have six, sometimes have seven. But I think absence of hegemony, single bipolar, you can challenge that by saying the United States remains the hegemon with Trump running rampage with trade and all. But we'll see how long this current American very assertive foreign policy, or some people say aggressive foreign policy, can last. Certainly won't last in every area, and security and territorial ambitions of the United States over Canada or Greenland or Panama Canal, it's not going to really manifest or become reality. This is just a lot of rhetoric. The United States, as I did say, is the number one power in the world. But that's not hegemony, and that's not about creating a hegemonic world order. It's basically, in some ways, coercive power. Hegemony is something, if you read Gramsci, it's something that, yeah, by consent and coercion, or by both. My colleague Robert Cox refined it a lot. So that's not happening. The United States can be the number one power, but cannot be the hegemon if it's not legitimizing itself and not accepted by consent. The European Union signed a big deal, nothing by consent, it's purely by coercion. And same with Philippines, same with Japan, same with Indonesia, and probably with India. Okay, countries alignments are fluid. You still have NATO, but very, very uh, shaky at the moment. Trump not giving a guarantee of unconditional U.S. commitment to NATO. It's very conditional commitment. Uh, Alignments, what Indian leaders sometimes call multi-alignment. I actually call it multi-engagement. You cannot align with the multiple powers, but you can engage multiple powers. And so you can engage with Russia on energy. You can engage with the United States on security. That's also not non-alignment. Non-alignment is sort of completely being or hedging. You actually proactively align based on issue area uh, and time. So the same countries can align with different actors. Southeast Asia, classic example. ASEAN countries uh, want good economic relations, positive, beneficial relations, economic relations with China, but good security relations with the US. They don't see as a mutually exclusive. So that's the characteristic of multiplex world. Very hard to do that in unipolarity or bipolarity. Very hard to do it multipolarity, because another thing about multipolarity is spheres of influence. You have a sphere of influence and you can only operate within that sphere. ASEAN countries are not in a sphere of influence of either United States or China. So there's some people think the sphere of influence is coming back. I don't think so. It's not coming back in the traditional 19th century way. So I think complexity, multi engagement, fluid alignments is actually good. You can have and hegemony can be single, unipolar, or collective. Multipolarity is also a form of hegemony. Okay, great power hegemony, not one, two, but five powers, like the Conference of Europe decided the whole fate of Europe, and not the countries like Poland had no choice. They got carved out by one power or the other. As long as great powers agree, you are finished. The weak and the medium powers have no place. Okay. Second, consequential actors. Here I don't talk about. Okay. Come on. This is not good. I think I have to go this way. So I already talked about the world is not just about great powers or states, as in the case of polarity. It's also about a lot of non-state actors, good and bad, and corporations and uh, social movements, social media, empowered people, and the like influencers. They also play a big role now in foreign policy that never did before. States are still important, but so are these others. Maybe not to the same degree, but much more important than they used to be on a global scale. Before you could have non-state actors, criminal groups, they didn't have this transnational reach now current bad actors have. Uh, Ideological, cultural, political diversity, there's no end in history. It's always going to be Democrats, authoritarians, populists, communitarians, extremists. And ideology is not going to be any singular the way we haven't talked about end of history. Economic interdependence is going to be, or globalization, uh, it's going to remain despite the disruption of supply chains. New supply chains will emerge. China is building its own supply chains directly, not going through the US. I think European Union is doing the same thing. You will find that supply chains will be less dependent on one country, one space, because of technology in particular. But also globalization will be led more by the East than the West. So here China plays an important role, India plays an important role, China more so because it has a lot more capacity of projecting economic power, if not military power. But still, in a sense, it goes back to history. Before the rise of the West, globalization was led by the East. The Indian Ocean was a big theater of globalization, Silk Road. So these are not meaningless metaphors. And I think the rise of China, India, despite the Trump uh, threats, is not going to be arrested completely. And there are others as well. Indonesia will play a role, South Korea. So the Asian countries, which are rapidly becoming, or already become the center of gravity of the world economy, they will lead globalization. And I was saying yesterday probably that globalization in that sense will be less imperialist because the modern globalization on the West was associated deeply with imperialism. And finally, pluralized, what I call G plus leadership and governance. So support for cooperation varies along issue areas. This has always been thing about global cooperation, global governance. It's not a linear thing, and it doesn't apply to. It depends on issue area. So we have had periods where there is no global governance in human rights, but more in trade and finance. Uh, Now we see a situation global governance generally is weakening, but until recently, global governance was rising in climate change, public health, not in trade. WTO has fallen out of the cliff, so out off the cliff, so to speak. So I think whatever globalization happens will be depending on some areas cooperation will be stronger, some areas cooperation will be weaker, but they're not going to disappear. So keep that in mind. And also there will be more actors. There will not only the UN, and UN is increasingly challenged or complemented by other actors in global governance. This is a very common finding of global governance literature that there were centers of authority, new centers of action in global governance. Some of them are regional, like the European Union or African or ASEAN, but they're also public-private hybrid, public-private governments, corporations, governments and NGOs, corporations and NGOs. Uh, Leadership is changing. So that sort of complexity, that sort of a internet governance with ICANN domain name provider sanctioner called ICANN. That's complexity. Management of forestry, especially when it comes to climate change. There's a lot of partnership where you have multi-stakeholders, states, corporations, people, experts, expert groups, and underlie cooperate. Now, I think that's not going to disappear, whether Trump or no Trump. That's going to be the wave of the future. United Nations will survive, I think, but not all. The UN is another thing. It's not a singular entity. Uh, Security Council, not very credible, functional these days, or WTO. But some of the other organs of the UN are very important. UNDP is important. The Human Rights Council is very ideological, but the UNICEF, the UNSCR, still are important in creating norms. They don't have resources, but they create norms and principles. And UNESCO, which now US has just withdrawn from, but UNESCO is very critical to heritage management. It may not be so critical to education, but just think about the UNESCO heritage sites, the giving sanctity, sanction, making things popular, attractive, and also helping preservation. Still very important uh, to the people. Nobody is going to follow the US, maybe very few withdrawing from UNESCO because of the heritage management. That's a very important part of your culture, right? Uh, so if you go into this, leadership in global governance varies along issue areas. Multiple actors, complexity, hybridity, partnership becomes the norm, and no state will lead or follow on every issue. Leading is important. The United States is the leader, sorry, most powerful country in the world overall: military, economic, financial, technological. There are four areas. If you combine them together, military, economic, but economic you have to disaggregate economic, trade with finance, and finance is where United States dollar supremacy is very important, and remains important for will be for a while, and then technological. So US is number one, but it's not the number one leader, partly because it doesn't want to lead and it's not credible as a leader because of the policies of the Trump administration. The European Union, not a military power, doesn't want to be or can be, but it is certainly a very important leader when it comes to managing climate change, mitigating climate change, and human rights to the extent it matters these days in their agenda. Setting norms in even AI, European Union is doing a lot of things. So you can talk about China, leader in economic development, infrastructure development, whether you like BRI or not. The fact is that it has China is the largest trading partner of most countries in the world, and BRI has really a large number of constituents. Not all uncritical, but still it's important. China spends more money on infrastructure development than Western countries combined. International infrastructure assistance. Okay. Uh, Countries like India may have specialized leadership, vaccines, pharmaceuticals, maybe in some ways application of AI. Countries like Nigeria, Brazil, they also have specific areas. Some of them are regional leaders, like Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore are regional leaders in trade, security, mediation, and the like. So you have the many of the BRICS nations that are also regional leaders. They have an important regional voice. May not have so much global voice except to the BRICS, but in the regions they play a very important role. So different regional leaders, we combine all this, the world becomes much more decentral, pluralistic in terms of architecture of governance, but organization of order. So that's what multiplexity is about. The unipolar, bipolar, multipolar cannot capture this complexity. I can say messiness, but that world is messy. Life is messy. So you have to live with it rather than saying, oh, we should go back to multipolarity or go back to unipolarity, or bipolarity is more stable than multipolarity, that Kenneth Walls used to say. Uh, so I want to capture, it's not just an ideal type for me, not even an ideal type. This is not why I whisper. This is how I read the world as it is now. And I don't find any other term that is satisfactory. Okay. So finally, how do you use all this for IR? It's a great opportunity for IR scholars. You now have the field is open for you in some ways, legitimized for you to study things that nobody used to study before. For writing a PhD or master's, you can use some of the historical knowledge to challenge theories like hegemonic stability, class of civilization, end of history, the grand narratives. You can construct alternative narratives, expand existing narratives. You have a lot more case studies. You can talk about realism, which people have already started. In India, they have done it, but people from in other parts of the world can also study India to get an idea of balance of power, and not just Indians. And ancient Greece. Liberalism, you can look at where did free trade come from? Clear challenge to hegemonic stability. Britain, United States, brought here, so West created it. So whether you like it or not, here is an opportunity to explore. And Roman Empire and Indian Ocean, compare and contrast them. Who provided more free trade? Constructivism, humanitarian values. Compare the Magna Carta with Mandan Charter or a Code of Manu. So you can have, whether you are a constructivist, realist, idealist, or post-colonial. Post-colonial particularly is a challenge to go beyond colonialism, past colonialism, and explore the agency of countries that we call as global south, when they were also big empires and sometimes very oppressive empires too. So don't have a very Pan-Russian view of the global south. They're all built on empires which often have very harsh traditions, right? So, but also they made a lot of contributions. So your field is wide open now to do this, and if you do this well, now as a student, as a scholar, as a young professor, you need to be very careful, evidence-based, use not very formal methodology, statistics, and all, but at least qualitative methods, and do this well. Now, my book doesn't have much theory because I wanted to make it as broad as possible. But you could develop theories out of it, or support theories, or challenge theories by reading this book. And that's what when I go to small seminars with graduate students, I often give a lecture how this is relevant for IR theory. And this is just a snippet of this. So this could be a textbook at the undergraduate level, but actually a field of study, a kind of a canvas, a source book for theories at a more advanced level. Right. So therefore, I think I will just stop here. There's a policy. You're not policymakers, so stop that. So these are some of the things people have said. The one I like most about is Amitav Ghosh, the model for academic disciplines founded on colonialist assumptions. He has a lot more to say about this book in the back of the book. Uh, challenging, well, it's a decolonial study. Nobody has called me decolonial, but he did it. I don't know him. I only got to know him personally. We met him a few times on book signing. But my publisher contacted him. He wrote this blog, and then he wrote to me recently uh, or something else. And well, I'm very happy with that. There's Parag Khanna, there is Shashi Tharoor, there is Kishore Mahbubani, Gareth Evans, Rana Mitter, and Ani Westard, and Ayaz Jarkol. So I value their comments because they're a diverse group of people. There was a review of the book in Wall Street Journal said, "Oh, this book got a blurb from Kishore Mahbubani. It can't be good. Got a blurb from Gareth Evans, anti-American." Well, getting criticized by Wall Street Journal is kind of a by a guy who's from the American Enterprise Institute. It's kind of a badge of honor for me. It sort of vindicates. It hit the right nerve, the right people. But New York Times did a New York Times has a lot of flaws, but they are more open to Wall Street Journal, to be say the least. They were very positive about this and the review, and also they allowed me to publish an article in the main page, opinion page, on the day the book was launched. So this is going to have a mixed reaction. This is going to be controversial, but that was part of the purpose. And I would love to have challenging questions about this and be able to respond to them. And so that's what I will leave here, and I will be happy to take your questions. As you said, the book is available, and you can certainly get it, but you will get a lot more out of this lecture by going through uh, the narrative, extended narrative. Okay, so in we have an hour for Q&A. So if you want me to lecture more, I can, but I don't know how you feel. You want to get the money, your money's worth. You will get the professor to talk. Some students love it. They don't want me to take questions from the audience, but in some places they think audience participation is vital. So I am trying to do both. So we had a lot of discussions, questions, but my expectation and hope would be that to make the room a bit cooler. The air conditioning is working, and you have not been talking about making it cooler. That we haven't asked questions, please, sir. This is a smaller room. It's easier to actually have a conversation. Yes, yes.
Pani said, and very evidently said that Europe is going to be declined. It's going to be ended part itself. Europe is going to be declined. But the new power is coming to life in place of Europe, ASEAN countries, those 10 countries. And he said it on the basis of the population and the economy, comparing economy and population between these two uh, uh, entities like Europe and the ASEAN. And in both countries, they said that Europe, which is influenced by the US mostly, and the ASEAN is more closer to China. So, do you think the order which we are talking about, world order, it is shifting from west to east? And he said like two things, the economy and population. But I also think that societies also play a more vital role in this area for the shipment. And as this book says, the future world order, like we know that in history repeats itself, history, that the east were the most powerful in past. And now again we are going to that direction. It's like that.
Very good question. And Kishore Mahbubani will love your comments. I know him personally. I worked with him. In fact, he launched in Singapore last month. So I'll let him know that I was giving a lecture in India, and once participant stood up and said, "You actually have read his book, and you've summarized it extremely well. So fantastic." Now, do keep in mind that Kishore, like many policy-oriented scholars, also slightly overstate their case. They generally they make the point they believe in, but they also make it in a way that grab attention. And some of the same can be said about my book, because of this book, the parent company is the same. So, Hatchet Books is the parent company of Basic Books, which published mine, and Kishore's is Public Affairs. So that's right. Kishore might have said the way you put it in a bifurcation, China, US. He also pays a lot of attention to India. He is originally actually from South Asia. He left during partition, and uh, he talks about the rise of Asia rather than rise of China in particular. He challenges the Western view of China and that it's unduly alarmist and negative. And I think he may turn out to be correct in the end. The jury is out. But, generally, yes. But your second point about people matter, society matter, is correct. And I don't think he will disagree with that. He will actually support it. I know him well enough. I worked with him for a long time. I was in Singapore for 11 years. I have differences with him, so I don't buy his only ideas of Asian values. But I think a very smart, very astute person, a scholar, public intellectual. He's a public intellectual rather than an academic. So the thing is, how do you bring people into the picture, right? And it's not easy to do that. I try to do that with multiplexity. I can't say that there are a lot of stuff in my book that talks about people, but I keep that in mind. My way of understanding history is popular history, people's history. That'll be a different book, and I will not have the competence to write it. But certainly, I do not dismiss them either. Never would say states matter. Civilization is the kind of building block of this book, right? And civilization is not the same as states. Civilization is more of a cultural, ideational thing, and that's where people come in. When we talk about religion, talk about individuals like Ibn Rushd, who was a judge, so it's exiled by the Sultan. Talk about Amartya Sen, Mahabubul Haq. They are also people, human security, which is discussed in the book. So you bring in individuals, as people, right? But not the social movements in a large sense. So I take your point, and it'll be really nice if somebody could write a book about the people's history of world order, just like people have written about people's history of United States. Very, very important. I talk about tribal groups, Iroquois, who never had an empire, but their tribal populations. I'd love to write something about tribal groups in India, Austroasiatic people of South Asia. Okay, less than that, more than 20% in Odisha by the Austroasiatic groups. It's a very large number of people who we call scheduled tribes, but their counterparts are speak similar language to Vietnamese and Cambodian, Khmer, very, very same language groups. All right, so the other question, what you said, I want to slightly clarify this here, that I do not say history repeats itself. The book is not historicist in that sense. What I do say, history matters, but how it matters, that it opens to a range of possibilities of building the world order. It confirms one view in the book that world order is fair creation. But let's say today there is no this American-led liberal order is ending. We talk about multipolarity. People talk about multipolarity as if ideal typing European history. I would say, well, there is also multipolarity in the Amarna system, 15th century BC. Or I would say multipolarity has never been really the norm of the world. It has been multiplexity. Indian Ocean is not multipolar, but multiplex. Or we can talk about the Chinese tributary system as another ideal type. So you have 5, 6, 10, dozens of possibilities. You could be reviving empire, but which empire? The British Empire, or the Roman Empire, or the Inca Empire, or the Mongol Empire, or the Gupta Empire. So these variations allow us to think about possibilities. So the purpose of the book is not history repeats itself, but history is kind of a window into many types of alternative types of world order. By looking at it, you can say, okay, might be here. This might be more real. This might be more real. This might be coming. That's up to the reader. I never say multiplex is a way of multi-civilizational and the window, opening up the window to a future of possibilities that we don't know which one will become uh, the dominant feature. Maybe none of them. Maybe we'll have a world of region. Different regions will have different types of order, regional orders. Okay, so that's the thing. I actually very specific about not saying that history repeats itself. Yes, yes.
Now my question is that how
You speak up a bit loud so others can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you.
does multiplex world order encourage or constrain alternative forms of coercion like state-sponsored sanctions or public boycott?
Sorry, that was a little too fast for me. Can you how the people
Multiplex world order encourages or constrains the alternative forms of coercion like
on course okay,
coercion,
course.
like state-sponsored sanctions or public boycotts.
It may not. Multiplex order is not going to be all good and no bad. So I don't know that it can totally avoid coercion in any world. No world order is truly peaceful or free of conflict. But what the multiplex order can do is that it creates opportunities and more possibilities to bypass cooperation. So in some ways, it kind of incorporates elements of multipolarity. This is why I never totally reject it. So you have coercion from power A, you can turn to power B, or your power C. In a multipolar system, you have more choices to align yourself. But in a multiplex order, the difference is you don't have to do that in every issue area. So you have the Indo-Pacific, something that India is doing to avoid coercion from China, right? But you also need China to want to expand your market and opportunities if you want to survive the American sanctions. So India can align itself on energy with Russia, economics with China, security with the US. Now, I don't think you can do this to a limitless extent. I mean, at some point, uh, the choices will be narrow. You know, you cannot have your cake and eat it too. That's what I've been talking about Indian foreign policy for a long time. You have to sometimes have make choices, but not the big choices. And India has done this successfully. So I call it multi-engagement. I don't call it multi-alignment because alignment means something. Is more rigid. uh, so multiplexity allows more multi-alignment possibilities or multi-engagement possibilities. And that way you may be able to avoid coercion because the last thing you want to do is to become totally dependent on one power for everything. And that's what the big mistake the world made is to depend on the United States for market access. The United States provide a lot of things to a lot of countries, good and sometimes have negative influence. But one thing that both allies, non-aligned countries, and competitors uh, use the US is for market access. So whether it's China, whether it's India, whether it's Korea, whether it's Brazil, they all latched onto US as a big market. So they became dependent, ever so dependent on the US market. And Trump came and said, oh, this is the element of leverage. So you depend on me, my market, you cannot survive without my market. So I'm going to get tariffs, 20%, 30% change just like it wakes up in the morning. So the world is suffering because it became too dependent on American market access. So there is a statistics about this. You can read US Trade Representative that how many countries, China is actually one of the most dependent countries on US market, security rival. So how did that happen? Uh, the countries always thought they can get away with this, that there will be no Trump. But then Trump came and very cleverly he got into the most powerful instrument of leverage, much more powerful than military intervention or coercion. Economic coercion is much more important because these countries have sold the future to this, market access. Even though it's 15%, 20%, still vital. Look at the way the European Union and all going to, and in a very humiliating way in some ways. We will look at the media reaction to European Union US trade deal. Uh, People are furious. I don't think the European Union will not have a major political crisis soon. Uh, by signing the deal, I think maybe the leaders of European Union felt that there is no choice. This is the best they can get. They may look good from their own point of view, but why they allow themselves to be in this situation, right? So think about this. I mean, in some ways, there will be debates in India about this soon. That should we do this? Why can't we do what happened during Indira Gandhi, for example? When the United States was not friendly with India, India was not independent of the US. So there will be all sorts of debates in European Union, in India, even in China. This is happening. In Japan, this is happening. But the world allowed itself to become dependent on access to the US market so that their prosperity through neoliberal globalization will depend on how much they can export to the US. In the meantime, they forgot about the neighbors, they forgot about other export markets. The Chinese are waking up to it now, but the supply chain and the capacities are now, it will take some time to move back from that. It will happen, but it will take some time. All right. Let me see who hasn't asked over there. Yes. Never asked a question, right? Well, yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. What's your question? Sorry. Say that louder. There's a fan on top of your head. Yeah. World War Two. World War Two. Yeah. Yeah. I got your point. Yeah. So two ways. One is that I already told you. I don't think there will be a return to the sphere of influence like what we had in Europe between World War One. Germany sphere of influence, Russia sphere of influence, Britain sphere of influence. Second, there are no colonial empires here. We have legacy of colonialism, but before World War One or before World War Two, the vast majority of the world under colonial was colonized under colonial rule. The world was never really interdependent. It was dependent. The countries of global, what we call global south, were dependent, not interdependent. with the colonial masters. So that's not going to be happening. And I think another thing is multipolarity. That multipolarity was very different again because of colonialism. There was no nuclear weapons at that time. Now we have nuclear weapons. So this will not be a return to pre-World War situation. If anything, I would think it will be, again, I don't want to say the history repeats itself, but I think the world of the Indian Ocean before the Portuguese arrival in India, it may become more like that, where you have multiplicity of actors and reasonable amount of interaction, spread of ideas, and come to put a kind glass, positive glass to it. It could also have some insecurity, instability, and but also a lot more space for medium and small powers than they ever had. Now, this could all be wrong. You could say there will be a Chinese hegemony, there will be Indian hegemony, but I think to the extent that history matters, you could be more like the pre rise of the West period rather than the pre-World War One period. Okay. Yes. The as you said, this era is the multiplex era, and even in modern fiction, you talk about the monopoly is not the world order was not by made by some or created by a single monopoly, but two other things. So my question is the monarchy dominated the global governance for thousands of years. While democracy gained prominence only since 1945, how long do you think democracy can continue to shape the world? Could it endure for centuries as a monarchy once did? Okay, so uh, democracy can never save the world. Um, Democracy has never really been able to save the world, but it is true that democracy is a very powerful ideology in the late modern last 100 years or so. And that's partly because there was this Cold War where Soviet Union supported communism and the West supported democracy. Now, this is not true of any. The United States also supporting authoritarianism in home. And actually, non-democracy is actually giving democracies some more space. So this ideological divide has broken down. So I think we should stop thinking in terms of democracy versus authoritarianism. There are a lot of shades of grays in between communitarianism, populism, and we can talk about extremism. So democracy is not going to be the savior of the world, even though it may be the best, most acceptable form of political institutions to many people, not all. There are actually a lot of people who don't like democracy and think it's dysfunctional. Aristotle himself did not like democracy. Aristotle thought democracy is a very corrupt form of government. We don't probably know that. But that can happen. So I think monarchy, on the other hand, has been singularly successful throughout history because of divine legitimation. And in fact, the most successful form of political institution in the world is divine monarchy. Alexander got it from the king of Persia, the great king and the pharaoh of Egypt. He propagated it, Europeans might have got it through Alexander the Great. So, and it has survived. But even then, it's not the same monarchy. It's not going to be the dominant form of a political institution in the future, or even now. So my point is that the ideology of the multiplex world will be diffuse, not singular, complex, hybrid. There will be always contestations between forces of openness and forces of closeness in every society. It depends on who wins at a particular time. Democracy is not doing very well in many countries in the world, part of the world. In fact, in Asia, not doing very well at all compared to 20, 25, 30 years ago. So only the future can tell. I do not have a crystal ball to talk about domestic politics, but I'm not predicting. Uh, in 10, 15, 20 years, we'll see a more democratic term in world order. At the moment, it's not. It's a authoritarian term. Okay. More questions? Yes. So thank you so much for the very performance lecture. And it has given so much to ruminate in the future.
But sir, my question is really on a previous question, which was about the sense of history. That sense of history that you have, yeah, in your work. It seems like the civilizational view that you hold, it seems like civilizations don't evolve or evolve. So the view don't evolve or evolve. Evolve, like in a historical sense. Yeah. Like how you were saying in your presentation, you mentioned that one of the defining feature of this multiplex world order, you said there won't be hegemony or hegemony will go down. Yeah, yeah. But if we look at the colonial history of the world last 200, 300 years, so we see that West has had a practice over these years, and certainly the Eastern civilizations will learn from those practices, and they might also, imbibe those values and uh, want to practice hegemony. They require the kind of power. Thanks.
Okay, there are several things in there that I kind of lost track of, but one thing that's you asked me, that civilizations devolve or not. I think they can. In fact, in my book, I told you the humanitarian values of first century BC AD were far more progressive than today, especially just war, despite the Geneva Conventions. So because they were not just legal, but they were also imbibed. So the rise of the West corrupted a lot of these ideas that were there in non-Western societies, right? So it's a digression. Racism, scientific racism, did not exist in the ancient world. It's a very controversial proposition. We have caste system, we have here, we have slavery in India, we had, but the scientific racism that we have today. Slavery existed in China, every society. Greeks and Romans have slaves, but they were not scientifically racist. That there is a genetic makeup of people that makes them smart or stupid. That's a European invention. So modern European American invention. So that's a regression, right? Uh, the world going backwards. So you can also find that in some ways, building economic growth with justice kind of become weaker with the neoliberal globalization. So it's a bit of a regression. In some ways, globalization has benefited everybody, but it has made poverty and inequality more entrenched. The evidence is very clear. So I am not taking a linear progressive view of civilization. I don't think civilization is moving in ever better directions. It could be the other way around. If it didn't come out very clearly in the book, that probably it has to be, and maybe in a future article I can clarify this on the second edition. But that's the whole idea. But I think generally there has been progress. I'm not also one of those things. The whole is going to have become totally inhuman, corrupt, decadent, and then which world has been really not like that. Every civilization, every phase of history has attraction and ugliness. But that's one point I want to emphasize. There's no linear evolve. So still have time for questions. How? Yeah, there's a question there. I'll come back. So how are you going to do this? Keep taking questions. Yeah. Keep taking questions. Yeah. Uh, right. So I saw a hand. Okay. Well, maybe you. You have been waiting, and then on the very back. Uh, well, I'll come back to you. You're number three. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, basically, when you were saying that you were proposing multiplex, but I don't find any other alternative. What I was thinking that can there be bipolarity within multipolarity?
Hmm.
Yeah, where I mean, there's not any specific, say, reason for say US or China, but maybe regions.
Within regions. Yeah. I think that's quite possible. But I have regional bipolarity. Yes. Um, Also, bipolarity at the global level is not totally untrue. I mean, it may be in the economic area. But you say the whole world is going to be either US or China. Most of the countries are not taking sides with the US-China dispute. So bipolarity is not really very attractive. Uh,
By multipolarity.
well, there has been a term called bimultipolarity during the Cold War. So I think Kenneth Walls and others talk about it. Yeah, that's possible. But again, remember, multipolarity, any polarity is about power distribution. Unless if you define polarity in terms of ideas, soft power, interaction, that's not polarity anymore. That's complexity, multiplexity. So somebody might say that, oh, what you're saying is you're just making broadening polarity. I'm not saying that. I think there comes a time. There comes a time when you add too many variables to polarity. It's not polarity anymore. It becomes something else, and that something else is multiplex because that's very different. The kind of cooperation alignments, global governance structures, globalization is so different that you cannot really capture it in any language of polarity. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, you should tell your names. You've forgotten. The professor had said you should tell me our names. So my name very loud and clear. Yeah. My name is L11. Sir, I have a question. You from AML? Yes. Okay. I have a small question. So what would be the regarding structure in the multiplex world? So since we have come to inside most of the non-structure so far has been controlled by the West versus the ground. So how is it with the rise of equal flowers in small flowers? How would knowledge production be? Okay. So, good question, great question. I think they can do it in two ways. One, they can do it the very narrow, ethnocentric, essentialist way, and say only about what Indians are writing or Indians did 5,000 years ago or Chinese did 5,000 years ago, or read about other non-privileged writers, critical writers, and mix and match. So I think it will be unfortunate if knowledge production changes from being Western centric to centered in one country, one region. Okay. So this book therefore has 14 chapters covering all civilizations. So knowledge production is also a shared commodity, and you will find a lot of similarities, but also differences. So I hope regional powers will pay their attention. And there is a tendency in many countries now, the rising powers to be nationalistic, inward looking, and talk of their own history. I talk of non-Western history for sure because they have been talked down for so long. But I would not do the expense of uh, learning. You have to learn something first about others to criticize, right? So I think you should let others know everything that is out there and don't privilege one particular way of learning. The book tries to do is looking at primary sources or bring some ideas uh, that has not been noticed before. But I would not say that's it's Chinese or Indian or Islamic ideas matter. I think African ideas matter. The Iroquois Federation confederations had great ideas. So if you pluralize knowledge production, then you'll make good sense of the book, but also sort of challenge the current paradigm of knowledge production. Okay, let's take a question from this side. Yeah, back. You haven't asked any question. Okay, so what's your name? My name is Devdas. I'm pursuing masters in Department of Political Science, Master. Then my question is that in what way do China's rare earth I really don't know much about it. I mean, it's really beyond my pay scale, so to speak. I know generally, but what's the question exactly? Okay, so again, not knowing much about rare earth, but I think the overall broad question is that it does reflect a shift from openness to closeness, right? But I think the fundamental question is why is this happening? Why is happening now and didn't happen 20 years ago? And what countries are going to do about it? I think we know the answer. It is the outgrowth, a byproduct of the US-China trade war, and there are many factors to it. Economic nationalism in the US is one factor. China also turned a bit more inward looking, not in economics, but in political economy. So, yes, it is a shift away from economic interdependence in the classic liberal sense to a realist competition. But again, I would not really make it a kind of a very rigid, fixed category, unchanging category. One thing is who is the export controls going to affect most, right? And maybe it is targeted against the United States more than against other countries. So China is weaponizing rare earth, but so is the United States weaponizing a lot of things. So this is kind of a retaliatory measure, but it's not necessarily going to affect the whole world. And there could be also changes as part of this deal that the U.S. and China are reaching. So what I tried not to do is to jump from one absolute to another absolute. There was never really full economic openness in many areas. The United States had technology transfer for a long time in many critical areas at that time. It's now going to have some in AI and others. The Chinese have their own technology or resource export controls. So world order certainly has certain amount element of that. Then sooner or later, countries will move away from rare earth. The dependence will reduce, and this becomes less important. So let's wait and see. And at the moment, that's what you said is what it looks like. Whether in the long term it will be like that, we don't know. Yeah. I just wanted your comment on this observation. The United States wants a unipolar world in a multipolar Asia. China wants a multipolar world but unipolar Asia, dominated of course by China. India wants a multipolar Asia and a multipolar world. So what is your take on this? I actually haven't thought about it. It's not a nice way of putting it, but any fixed characterizations are sometimes to me uh, problematic. I'm not saying you're wrong, but the United States wants a multipolar world, but then why is it doing things like under Trump that are very much only recently US tried using the term multipolar during Biden administration. For a long time, simply didn't use it. So they never moved away from unipolarity. Whether in the Asia or in the world. The Chinese want a multipolar, unipolar Asia. It's also problematic because the Chinese, I mean, some rhetoric at a rhetorical level, you can read that into Chinese, but they know very sure they're never going to control India, Japan, or ASEAN, Indonesia. So it's maybe if they really thought like that, and I'm not saying they thought, there's no really nobody has grand access to the grand design of China. There may not be any grand design. The long game, that's one of the books talks about. Uh, I think a lot of this is academic and policy pundit imagination. So I don't know what India wants because it varies from government to government and varies from time to time. So India wants a multipolar world with a what? Multipolar Asia. Multipolar Asia. By China. Yeah, but again, multipolar Asia, when it comes to uh, have, all emerging powers want multipolarity because it gives them a place on the table. So Russians love multipolarity. French have always loved multipolarity. The bipolar Cold War. Brazil loves multipolarity. South Africa loves it because it gives them a seat on the table, recognizes them as poles. And in India, until now, was not considered a great power, maybe more like a middle power, a regional power. So, technically speaking, not really a multipolar polar actor, but now it could be. So, if you are an Indian government, you will embrace multipolarity. That's what you want. But can you get what you want? Do countries get what they want? May not get it, but if it gets it, India sometimes India may regret multipolarity because it creates more constraints on them. Who are the poles? Who are the powers? So I try to avoid generalizations like this because each of them are problematic. Back there, you have another question. Okay, I'll come back. Oh, you had a question. I missed you, right? Okay, I'll go ahead and I'll come back to you. Yeah. So it is related to knowledge production. Who are you? My name is Rohit. I can explain the department. It is related to knowledge production and what we done yesterday. My question is, can we have an inclusive global IR with the existence of dominance of English? Because when we were talking about diversity, when we were talking about different agencies, so we assert our identity, our agency in our own language. And when we were asked to imagine being conceptualized in a foreign language, we lose nuances, we lose complexities of our thoughts. So if it is not possible, would you think that instead of having a inclusive global IR, we will have a global IR which is inclusive for the elitist classes of the South, not rest as a whole? So this is my question. Quite possible, because it's a hierarchical, and world is hierarchical. Global South has many gradations, hierarchies. A global power South is in India, China, global South. In the real sense, same way as say Malawi or Mali or Tahiti or so you have to acknowledge the power structures within the global south. So this question did come up when we were doing non-Western IR theory back in 2005-7. Barry Bujan and myself, and people said, think we're replacing Western IR with Indian IR or Chinese dominated IR. So that's true. That's true. That's the risk we have to recognize. Um, this book is not about IR theory, it's about world order. And I consciously try to become like a Western dominance repressed by Chinese. China and India are the greatest civilizations after West. I don't think so. I also think Islam is great. I also think Africa is great. I actually learned so much from pre-Columbian Americans, so much on ecology, politics, governance, cooperation. So I'm struck by it. So deliberately, I do not create a narrative from the global south centered on three great civilizations, which are great. I mean, China-centric, or China, India, and Islam. Islam, in many ways, is much more diverse. By the way, you may be surprised, but it has no one center. So China always had one center, right? China, okay. Islam had no one center. So there is the Abbasid, the Islamic Spain, Indonesia, Mughals, and then you have Ottomans, the Fatimids, and later Persian empires. So they Mongol were not Islamic. You said Mongol. Mongol was actually Buddhist. Sorry. Yeah, I already said Mongols. Yeah. So and also the problems with the Deccan people. So Islam had multiple centers. You never had that multiplicity in China or India. If you had, it's within different regions of the countries. The China had capitals in Western China, Xi'an, Luoyang, Hangzhou, and then the south, sorry, in Nanjing. Okay, the centers may have shifted, but the cultural centers remain within one area. Same with India. So we can have some variations. So Islam actually has much more diversity, and when Islam moved from different parts, from place to place, it actually acquired a lot of local characteristics. There is this idea of Ummah, there is this underlying unity, but most Islamic scholars who actually are unbiased and objective acknowledge Islam was very much localized in many parts of the world, and that's history. So I think, therefore, we also have to accept when you talk about centrism in a country, knowledge production, who is centrism? So it's the South Indian centrism or North Indian. Knowledge production in South India may be different from North India. In China, I have seen a Chinese school, a Tsinghua University school, Tsinghua school, a Shanghai School of IR. They all have different priorities. Shanghai School is more liberal, uh, Asia Pacific oriented. The Tsinghua School is more classical Chinese oriented. The, the Chinese School of Xinya Qin is about China as a civilization and not just classical civilization. So we will find these debates also within in Turkey, and I hope there will be such debates in India, and that's healthy. Yeah.
Yeah, so follow-up question with this only. So as you mentioned, the pluriversalism, and don't you think the pluriversalism will have some dominant consciousness of West rather than the emerging consciousness or subaltern rising subaltern? What?
Um, Good point. I will let you know when I understand what pluriversalism means. So it's kind of coming up and it's all over the place. So they haven't had. There are some new literature that has come out, but that could be one of. So can you repeat your question so I can actually tell my pluriversal friends that it can.
That the pluriversalism will have a dominant effect, a dominant consciousness of West descent because they have the means of controlling the means of communication. And if you control means of communication, you have it control of whole
But
knowledge
how would they do? They are pluriversal. If they're doing different universes, can they create a singular narrative?
No, they can't.
So why is that bad?
I'm not saying it's bad,
Ah,
but because if they read Muhammad Ayub or if they read Path of Chatur, they are talking about the subaltern consciousness, or they want,
yeah.
and if we talk about decolonization,
So, okay. So the point, if I understand correctly, the pluriversal will challenge the subaltern consciousness, kind of a recognized, identifiable. It could well, but they said that's so what? That's what. If I am a pluriversal, I'm on their camp. If I have to put myself in the camp, they said that's good. So they are challenging also global IR. The global IR they think is kind of mono universal, which is the false reading of global IR. But they would think we shouldn't have a single subaltern consciousness. That's what they may say. Okay, I'll test it out with some of my friends there. Uh, yeah.
Sir, my name is Nabil, sir, and my question is related to your multiplex. And when you discuss the multiplexity, you are somehow, of a downsides or rejection of multipolarity because highlighted there will be no hegemony.
Yeah.
But when I'm unpacking your multiplexity, it creates so much puzzling for me because if there is no hegemony, there will be a kind of international autonomy as claimed by the realists, particularly uh, like Kenneth Walsh and
Yeah.
Morgan, right? And if there is the international autonomy, then it means that there is no hegemon, means either the USA or the Europe. And if either of them is not, there will be no one. Now I'm waiting for longer time for my turn to
There'll be
rule over
no world.
for my turn to rule over the world to get the credit
Yeah.
by
Okay.
in the largest global interest. When it comes to my turn, the rules are changed. There will be no hegemon. Let's suppose there is no hegemon, it is good to have for the pluralistic world. But when it comes to the no hegemon, there is a question of international autonomy as claimed by the theorists. And again, the international autonomy, there is a resurgent power politics. And again, we return to the Hobbesian total contract. Then, if there is no Leviathan, there will be a kind of anarchy. We need to call it again the hegemonic stability theory, as claimed by the Robert Gilting, who somehow married between the hegemon and global governance. And there is a for the stable world order, there is a need of people. And again, we recall our former bosses, please come forward and save our world from the kind of poverty and the disability.
Okay. Okay. Can you wrap up and can you hear the question?
That's
Okay.
let's suppose I am wrong, sir. Let's suppose I am wrong. It is kindly over. It is a simple question.
No, it's not a simple question. It's a very
Any compatibility between the multiplexity and global governance.
well. I already said several things about it. First of all, I don't completely reject multipolarity. I just say it's too narrow. It's only about distribution of power. Multiplexity brings in other layers, ideas, norms, interactions, leadership, which are not don't correspond with power. And then I talk about multipolarity. Uh, Historical evidence that I find that multipolarity is relatively rare in international relations, uh, but it does exist and doesn't always have to lead to anarchy. So that's why I said there have been multipolar systems in the Near East. The Amarna system, again, you could go to read that article just came out 2 days ago in Foreign Policy magazine. Talks about multipolarity in the ancient Near East, how it maintained order for 200 years. Messy, it can be anarchic, but it can be also managed. Now, unipolarity has not been really benign to a lot of weak states, as is multipolarity, bipolarity also. Many countries get cut in between and lose their autonomy. So multiplex is also not completely in the doesn't have rules and norms. Multiplexity doesn't mean rules and norms disappear. So they actually could become even more important in types of rules and norms, not just those created by great powers, but also created by weak states, regional powers. A lot of evidence of that, that some of the big ideas of the 20th century have come from weak states or individuals not representing big powers. So multiplexity has widened the source of ideas. And in that sense, it can be more liberating. Multiplexity can also lead to anarchy. Yes, so it's not going to be a paradise. I say that very clearly. But we also cannot say it's a given. There has been cases where the multipolar multiplex has been able to be benign, provide more justice. So the default position of people that multipolarity or multiplexity is going to be bad because hegemony is there is no evidence for hegemonic stability theory, by the way, and it's a false appropriation from Charles Kindleberger. He never said you need a hegemon to create order. He basically said, looking at a particular juncture of history, that the loss of British dominant, Britain was willing but unable, America was able but not willing. A short period of history created this Great Depression, wall in depression. Now, he never said that's the law of history. Never said that. So the people have taken this into a kind of as if it's a law of history, and the liberal hegemony theory is basically restating hegemonic stability theory and misappropriating Kindleberger. And I don't think we should buy it because we write that book, Indian Ocean. Manjit and I wrote this book, Divergent Walls. We found that actually you can have stability, openness in a multiplex system without the single power, like Indian Ocean case. That's a very big case. Lasted for about 1,000 years. And multipolar worlds have not been that long. I mean, the European multipolarity is not 1,000 years old. So the Near Eastern multipolarity was maybe 300 years. So we have a big chunk of history that tells you we don't need a multipolar great power dominance, either liberal or any hegemony, to create order and stability. So again, the point of this book is opening up possibilities. You have possibilities where you have seen multipolarity create order, like European concerns, uh, systematic system, but you have also times when complexity has kept order. You have times when bipolarity. I don't think bipolarity is completely wrong. It did create order in the early phases of the Cold War. All this gets included that the American hegemony, the Chinese tributary system did keep peace up to a point. So the problem we have, cognitive problem, we refuse to accept complexity as reality. When things become complex, we withdraw. We think this cannot be true. And the criticism sometimes I get This is a kind of a wishy-washy concept. They can't understand it. But the fact is that it is the reality. The life is complex. Life is messy. Why can't we? There is a complexity theory, by the way, chaos theory. Okay, that's where the dinosaurs came and ate the people, humans. So Michael Crichton's. So think of multiplex as complexity. Um, Instead of movies, think of dinosaurs, right? Movies are dinosaurs anyway. So it's very hard for people to to accept or not to retreat when faced with complexity. Because multipolarity, simple, easy, bipolarity, simple, easy, is a sign of our, I call, and maybe a little part, intellectual laziness, inability to think clearly and accept that the world is always complex. And I want to provide a complex without bringing in chaos theory per se, but sometimes you can find patterns in complexity. You can find cooperation in diversity. And let's think of a world order that may look like. It may not last very long. There may be a new, so any prediction you make is not going to be forever, right? If you think of a multiplex world, if it is a prediction, maybe 20 years, 30 years, and maybe there will be something else. So nobody can predict the future. Right. In terms of questions, time, I'm looking at, we can take one more question. Uh, now, I want to take somebody totally new. The last chance, those who have not spoken. You have not asked a question, right? Yes. Okay. Please do so and introduce yourself. I know who you are, but for the rest.
I'm a faculty in the Department of Political Science. My teaching subject is public administration. My question is all about the world order. Whenever we are having a debate of the world order, there is one scholar in America whose name is Mr. Mullins.
Who?
Mr. Mullins. 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 So he has basically given a clue that whether we were having the world order run by the Britishers or the American-led world order or the Abbasid world order, or we can say the Ottoman world order, all these orders basically were the combination of the communities, like it was a Judo-Christian world order, or sometimes it was a Judo-Muslim world order.
Yeah.
And this argument was also supported by one of the scholars of the Germany. His name is Werner Sombart, who has written a very famous book, Jews and Modern Capitalism.
Okay, I haven't read the book, so can you just tell me the point?
He's of the view that it is a Jewish community, the financially strong community, which is moving from one place to another.
Yeah.
Make the nations great. So can we say that nowadays we are talking about the disintegration of America or the European world order or the Western world order, and we are talking about the Chinese world order or China-led world order? So can we say that the authority, the group of people who are managing the world order, they have shifted their center from the west to the east. So that's why this debate is taking place.
That's quite possible, and you can see that in some, to some extent, you can see corporations by moving their centers of production to other parts of the world have contributed to the dispersal of power. I don't think they've contributed to the decline of America because that was not the intention, and I don't think it declined that much in terms of its own power. It's just shifted from manufacturing to technology, finance. It still has a lot of levers of power. But even if there was some decline, it's being exaggerated. Like America was always great for a long time. You don't have to make it great again. But the corporations, as you said, they have helped the power shift, and because that's where they make the profit. But don't forget, the corporations have also enriched themselves, and they are also rulers of America. How many people from Wall Street are in the Trump administration?
Corporations are driven
So they did it themselves. Now they're crying foul if they are in the Trump administration. But in some ways, they did the practical thing. Not about the greedy corporations, but I'm talking about the manufacturers, corporations. Just go according of the market that think about. They found it. The Japan started the whole. That when Japanese valued, they can't in Japan make a to Southeast Asia, Taiwan, Korea, and then Chinese and benefited, and all followed. This is nothing to do with America uh, or countries, but corporations did play sometimes with the blessing of the case of Japan. Can we are living in the age of corporation? Well, that will be another extreme. I think about the dispersal of corporations who played their role. Other things are democratic norms. I mean, individual democracy, but the idea of a multilateralism, which is not a multilateral, is popular, voice to a lot of countries otherwise have no role. About Cambodia, I have Thailand. A few years ago, the president visited Phnom Penh. The American president would even know because Cambodia with the chair of ASEAN, with the chair of ASEAN. Somalia also creates that of disposal of authority, not just corporations. People can do that. There's been a lot of empathy among social movements against capitalism or apartheid. They also shift power away from states and the multipolar state-centric model. But I do think what you're right is that corporations have done a lot, and now they're paying the price, or maybe they won't pay the price. Maybe they're the only ones that will challenge Trump and say we cannot reverse, put the genie back in the bottle. All right, we stop now. In the time, uh, your organizers might have told you that we're not having a class from me in the afternoon. I hope that will be happy good news for you. So you will have a bit of free time, and it certainly is a bit of good news for me in terms of I want to sort of I have some work to do, and this has been pretty intense but very enjoyable. Thank you very much for your questions and comments, and I hope you will benefit and learn something from this uh, day and a half that I've been with you. And there are other great professors, so it's a great program. So enjoy the rest of the day. We'll have this final session tomorrow morning. So after 1 hour, I have a short panel tomorrow. So we break here now. It's 1:30. You come back at 2:30 here for the next session. So we go. Yeah.